we have the brilliance of African culture in spite of all that they have done to us.
This is a woman that has walked in the Pan-African movement, a mother of the movement that has
not just practicing African spiritual systems, but understanding them, studying them, pushing yourself to really envelop and manifest them. What they do is they give us things. Gifts come from them.
And so it's your spirit recognizes truth.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's inside, again, it's in our DNA, it's in our energy. This is who we are.
What is real for us is spirit. Mm-hmm. That is not real for Europeans.
What do you say to the people that look like us that don't see themselves as African?
Because our concept of life and death is radically different from other spiritual systems.
Each of those initiations are celebrated.
The transition from each stage to the next is a death and a rebirth, which means that for us, we are immortal.
It should be used in terms of resistance, especially now.
Oh, my God. You see?
Yeah. Welcome to another episode of Voices of IWA. I am your host, Iomi Shegun, and Voices of IWA is a podcast that elevates the voices of women throughout the diaspora who are practicing African traditional spiritual systems. This season on Voices of IWA, we have been talking about the embodiment of the Orisha. And in order to get to that point where we are actually talking about the different principles and the different energies of the Orisha, we wanted to make sure that we start setting up, right? We wanted to set up those conversations. In order to do that, we've looked so far at the word Esheshe and what it means, what our culture means to us as an African people throughout the diaspora. We've talked about character and how important character is to African spiritual systems. We've talked about, last week, we talked about our ancestors. We talked about our Ori, right? We've been really setting up on some very foundational topics that we think will help us this season to truly embody the energy of the Orisha. And today we're going to actually take, in looking back at our footage and looking back at this season, I recognized and realized that maybe there was an important conversation that we hadn't had yet. And I had the opportunity to speak to one of my elders who agreed last season that she would be on, but we didn't get to have it happen. And we thought that maybe this was a perfect opportunity to introduce you to somebody very special. And maybe she needs no introduction at all. She is an author. She is our elder. And she is a mother of the movement for Black people in the diaspora to be sovereign. As a matter of fact, I think I learned the word sovereign from her. And I am grateful to have Mama Marimba Ani in the space with us. Thank you for being here, Mama Marimba. I'm so very, very grateful. We talked last season about you being on the episode on the podcast, and I wanted to save you to the last, and we couldn't make it happen. So I'm really appreciative, and I also see how Spirit was working to have you be a part of this episode right now, because I can't think of another person that we should be having this particular conversation with. So to start, before we jump in, I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and maybe just talk a little bit. The question that we normally ask is, how did you arrive at African traditional systems, right? But for you, I almost want to ask a little bit more, like, how did you arrive in the movement? How did you arrive in the work, right, well, that you've been doing your entire life?
You know, it's interesting because those questions, actually the answer would be the same or related. Because my work, my interest, my life is all, I would say, politically, motivated.
Yeah.
Or the thrust, comes from what I consider to be my politics. um, and so that's the way I came into the work that I do, but that's also the way that I came into my conception of spiritual systems and our spiritual life and what it should mean, what it should do. It came from my passion for the movement and being part of the movement, which happened very young. When I say very young, I mean 22. Okay, that's young. That's very young for me. And so another thing is that I don't know what I would call it, if I would call it intellectually or as a scholar or academically, or I've always had this thing about philosophy. And philosophy for me, I don't know why, I don't know where it came from, but it was about asking the question why, and kind of getting to the fundamental of what's the meaning of things, of life, of us, of who we are and so forth. So I think that the combination of my political life in the movement, which started young, and then that penchant for asking the deep questions had me wind up there. What happened was the study of culture. I discovered that culture is the most important thing in a people's life.
Gotcha.
And we don't see it that way, only because if you go to school and they're teaching you about culture, they don't teach it as ideology. And that's what it is. Yeah. Because it tells people how to live. It tells people what you're living for. It also tells you who you're living for. Gotcha. And so I was drawn to Africa because of being taught by Nana John Henrik Clarke, who really just changed my life. He brought Pan-Africanism to me. And so when that happened, then I wanted to study Africa. I wanted to study everything about African civilization, African culture, and so forth. But what I discovered and felt was African culture is spirit. You see? So it's not separate from that. And when we talk about our spiritual systems, we're talking about our culture.
Right. Oh, so much. Okay. I'm excited to talk to you again. Thank you, Mama Marimba, for being here. I don't take it for granted. Anytime our elders, as a part of our systems, right? We are to learn from our elders, and you have always been a teacher to many. You're a teacher to me. You're a teacher to my husband. You're a teacher to my children. And you're a teacher to all of us. So thank you.
And I thank you for having me and for doing this, what you do, by the way.
So Mama Marimba has written many things, right? Google her, look her up. If you don't know her, right? You should. And if you are practicing African traditional systems and you haven't read Let the Circle Be Unbroken, or you haven't read, Yurugu is not in your library, then I would say that there's some work for you to do and some expansion for you to do. Because what we're talking about today is our African spiritual systems, right? And the fact that in last week's episode, one of the guests touched on the fact that our African spiritual systems are not a religion, but she said it was a science. right? And there's something that you wrote. You wrote Mama Marimba.
I like that.
It was. This is the Mama Marimba also has a newspaper that comes out. It's called the African World. And in one of her editorials, I want to read the editorial, Mama, and then we can start just kind of talking. You say, our spiritual systems were never used as religion. They are the culture, but they do not proselytize the culture with which they are identified. In this sense, our spiritual systems have not been intentionally political. Religions, on the other hand, preach ideologies and are used for domination and control, weapons for mass destruction of conquered cultures. Our spiritual systems, our cultural matrix, the African social order, was our first line of defense, and it was therefore the enemy's primary target for neutralizing our power. They successfully disconnected us from our greatest source of strength, our spirit and our culture, the African worldview and the way of life. They successfully replaced our belief systems with systems of control that conjured a belief in their supremacy. They infected us with self-doubt and self-denial, a lethal infection which has seriously weakened us and from which we have not yet recovered.
Yes.
I mean, it's strong and it's true. And what we want to talk about today, you all, is our African spiritual systems and why now, right? Why is it important for us now as African people living in the diaspora, right? As a Caribbean woman, as a woman who moved from the Caribbean to the South, right? Why is it important for me, for my children, for my children's children to know and understand African spiritual systems? And I'm so glad, I just want to touch on the fact that we're moving away from the word religion, right? Because that is actually a tweak in my own mind that I've had to do over time, right? To truly, since we're talking about embodiment, to truly embody the culture and the lifestyle is moving it away from this thought process of it being a religion.
You see, what happens is that one of the things that happens is that our people might personally become convinced that they need to move out of Christianity, for instance, okay? But they were raised in that.
Yes.
Now, that brought with it a paradigm, a way of being, a way of relating to the universe, a way of understanding nature, for instance, of understanding what a man is, what a woman is, and so forth. You know, it brings with it a whole set of definitions and values. And sometimes, I think too often, what happens is that as people, for whatever reason, move out of, let's say, a Christian formulation, you know, and they're moving away from what they were raised in. Unfortunately, a lot of times they bring with them the same thought forms, really. You know, the words may change, so you don't use those same words anymore. But you are trying to impose that on African systems.
Right.
And they're different, and they should be different. You see, so we have to think about that, and what religions, the non-African religions that we have, you know, been raised in, carry in them a narrative,
right,
which makes them political. Because it carries a narrative about who we are as African people, what Africa is, what Africa isn't, and what Europe is, and what, you know, and therefore what we should be and stuff. And we might not say those words, but we really are doing the same thing. So, for instance, I'm going to go all the way there.
Go there, Mama Marimba. It's okay.
somebody might say to me, do you believe in God?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's like, they think you got to believe in God. You know, I have to say to them, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I have to say that.
Mm-hmm.
And you see why? Is because whatever it is that you are assuming, no,
got to be.
I may not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see, I believe in my ancestors very much. And I believe in spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in a universal spiritual force and so forth. You see, but the language of it, we kind of carry from what we had in the past, from our enslavement, and the only thing that we knew and what was forced on us and so forth. You see, and we have to be very careful as we explain and come to understand our spiritual systems, our worldview, really, that we not try to say, oh yeah, we're just like them. We just have different words or whether, but we aren't.
How do we do that when we are surrounded by it, educated by it, submerged in it all day, every day? You know, like we are, like you're saying, like coming out of, for most of us that, I'll speak for myself, coming from Catholicism, right?
Yeah.
Growing up,
Yeah.
I grew up as a Catholic girl.
Yes.
And when I first got to college, you know, was my first experience in the Southern Baptist Church, right? That was the first time I felt like something else is moving in me. What is this, right? And I didn't know what that was because in Catholicism, you sat down, somebody else told you what to think. You couldn't even talk to God yourself, right? You had to go to the priest to talk to God. And then when I moved to Atlanta, you know, my husband at the time wanted us, he was like, no, we're African. He had been studying with Masuki Scales at Morris Brown. And he was like, no, like there is something different for us and I want something different for our family. And, you know, and I was like, no, it's me and Jesus. And what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Ancestors and, you know, and animal sacrifices. And it was scary to me. And I was scared.
Sure.
I was really scared.
Of course.
And it wouldn't be until different transitions, really the transition of my mother, right, at almost 30 years old, that made me think and know that there was something different. And that what I was taught, there must be more to this because I need to be able to connect with my mother. I need that. But it would be 30 years of indoctrination, right? Yes, and literally, I fought my first husband on like, I'm not African, I'm Caribbean. Like we used to have this conversation all the time, right? I'm not African, I'm Caribbean. Right. Like, you know, so he totally laughs when he sees me now. He's like, this is crazy, like coming from those conversations to now. But how do we do that? Like, what does that really look like to really move out of a Western mind frame when it's surrounded by you all the time?
It's a process. And but it is a major process. You know, it's a deep process. When we talk about African deep thought, as opposed to African philosophy, but deep thought, African thought is profound. The African worldview is profound. Also, the African understanding of the dynamics of the person. You know, I talk about that. We haven't used that like we should, but in Yoruba, you know, you have Ori and me. You know, have these different aspects of the person.
Yes.
You have that in every African language. So I'm real familiar with that in terms of a cant or in terms of tree language, in terms of that whole way of thinking. You know, with the sun and so forth, right? Your kra. These things represent insight into us.
Mm-hmm.
When you begin studying them, learning from them, and relating to them, they just make so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of bring you to yourself.
Yes.
In a way that was missing
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say it's a process, it's not necessarily simple or easy,
Mm-hmm.
but it shouldn't be. It is work.
Yeah.
It is spiritual work. And that's good.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with work.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the process of working, you come to know yourself, come to know your strengths,
Mm-hmm.
come to know what might be challenges. And by the way, in terms of Ancestor, I do Ancestor communion. That's me,
Mm-hmm.
right? They love me and I love them.
Yes.
But there may be things that have been challenges in your whole family line
Mm-hmm.
that come from your ancestors. And your ancestors will let you know that.
Yeah.
So they will let you know, be careful of that, work on that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is a part of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be your job to heal that for your family.
Mm-hmm.
You see, that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I've skipped to
No,
stuff,
you're good.
but that's
good.
how I do.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's important because if you do not do that healing work that is kind of ancestral, that has come, then what you do is you pass it on
to your children.
So you're passing on behaviors and challenges, problems, and to the next generation, which then they will have to deal with. But if we do what I call our ancestral work, which is our spirit work, you see, then we're saying, no, I'm going to do this for the family so that my children don't have to do that. And my children's children don't have to do that. So that in the African worldview and African spiritual thought and practice and science, as she put it, there is that family lineage connection which spirit takes. So we need to know that. And we know that by being connected to our ancestors. We know that through readings, through talking to them. You said you needed to be connected to your mother. Well, that came through, you're having these conversations. Which, by the way, I remember there was a person, good person, young, and she was living with me for a minute. And she was, well, what do you do? What is that? What is all of that? She was having a problem with my African spiritual, practice. But what really, really bothered her, which offended her, was talking about ancestors. Because for her, coming from a deep Christian, background, she said, no, there cannot be any spirit that lives and continues to live besides what her gods were.
Okay.
And I knew as an African that wasn't true because our concept of life and death is radically different from other spiritual systems.
Mama, you've talked several times, you said the African worldview.
Yes.
I don't want to skip I want to be thoughtful because I'm learning more and more.
Yes.
That there are some people who don't know, right? Who have been, I don't want to take for granted that they know. So can we just talk a little bit about what the African worldview is? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh. That, by the way, was my work. Mm-hmm. That was like my beginning first work. And that's what the circle is about. Mm-hmm. And what I was, I once had this kind of argument with a person who I won't name, but I said that their work was not using the African worldview. And they said, what do you mean, what African worldview? Which African worldview? Mm. And what that was implying was that, you got all these different languages, all these different groups and so forth, so that we couldn't talk in terms of an African worldview. Mm-hmm. My work has all been to show that I don't care if you are practicing a cant, if you are practicing Ifa, Eve, Afa, mm-hmm. Whatever, or what language you speak or what part of Africa you come from, mm-hmm. is that there are certain consistent principles in terms of how we conceive of reality.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
And that is basic to African culture. Mm-hmm. And so it has to do with, all people have culture. And all those cultures are different. Mm-hmm. And those culture is not individual. That's a mistake we make too, because of the language we get from Western academia and so forth. Culture is collective. Mm-hmm. Cultures are produced by groups of people who share a way of being and share a common spirit. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you get these different cultures throughout the world, right? They all have in common that they are group. They represent collectives, mm-hmm. right? Each of them is based on a worldview. And each of them generates a worldview that is a conception of reality and a way of relating to reality. Mm-hmm. Okay? We need to know ours. Right. Because that helps us to understand who we are. Mm-hmm. So what was happening was, if we go back to colonialism, now we got neocolonialism, is that the Europeans were coming in and studying African culture. They were defining it and seeing it in terms of a European Western mm-hmm. worldview, mm-hmm. which meant if you use their definitions, what we do makes no sense. Mm-hmm. And I will give you an example. I always like to use this. By the way, you said I was a teacher. That's all I do is teach. I love to teach. Mm-hmm. But I would use this when I would teach my classes, is that as Africans, if we need wood from a tree to make something that we use in our house, a stool or a drum, mm-hmm. part of a drum, to be carved, then where do we go? We go into the forest. We identify a tree. Mm-hmm. It's got to be a particular tree, mm-hmm. because we know the nature of that tree, what it does, what its spirit is, okay? And we have to cut that tree. Well, that means we're taking something from the tree.
Right.
But you don't just do that if you're African.
Right.
If you're African, then you've got to perform a ritual, which, by the way, I'd like to talk about at some point, because that's, we don't understand that, and that's very important, ritual. But you have to perform a ritual, and what that ritual is doing, it is symbolizing reciprocity, which is one of the most important principles in the African worldview. That is, we take, but we got to give. And whenever you're taking something, you got to give back. I do it with the ancestors. I'm asking all the time. So I have to give to them. I make offering to them. But I'm also getting things always from them, always. They give me so much. So I have to give thanks. And so all during the day, I have these things that I'm doing, which is giving thanks for what I've been given. Let's get back to the ritual that we perform when we take something from the tree.
Right.
We are saying we are giving thanks. What are we giving it to? We're giving it to the spirit of the tree. Now,
because we understand that the spirit has a tree. I mean, the tree has a spirit.
Right. However, if you talk about that in European academic terms, if you talk about or try to understand that, given their paradigm, which is what Yurugu is about, by the way, then it makes no sense.
Right.
Or it seems like nonsense. Or it seems like these people are crazy. What's up with these people? You see what I'm saying? And that's why worldview is extremely important in understanding our worldview so that we can explain ourselves and understand ourselves in terms of who we are. What is worldview? Worldview is that all people have a way of defining reality and understanding reality and understanding the universe. And the Greeks, you know, and in school, they'll give you these Greek words for it. They'll talk about ontology, for instance, which is really your concept of being, your concept of what is, you know. We have our own concept of that as Africans. What is real for us is spirit. That is not real for Europeans. Spirit isn't real. You understand what I'm saying? That's very important. So, I mean, how can we practice something and it be meaningful for us and effective and viable and so forth if it doesn't recognize spirit and we are spiritual people?
Mama, you said something that jogged. What do you say to the people that look like us that don't see themselves as African?
That don't what?
They don't see themselves as African. They say, I'm not African.
The book, Let the Circle Be Unbroken, is about that. And the reason I mention that is because, and I think I say in the introduction, the way the book came to be, the book came out of a class, a course, because this was in college. And I had inherited the course from the person who taught it before me, who was a Nigerian. And it was called Afro-American Humanism. Well, what happened was I would take everything that I would do where I taught, this was Hunter College in New York, and transform it and develop it, and it would become mine. Okay? And so now that course is, well, I don't even know if they still have it because I've been going for years. The implications of African spirituality in the diaspora. So the course was really African spirituality in the diaspora. Okay? But what it was, what practically was that I had to convince these young Africans, and that's what I loved about what I was doing. I was getting paid to do what I would do anyway, right. And what I always did, which was these young Africans, teaching them who they were, introducing them to who they were. So I had to convince them that they were African. How do you do that? Which is your question. I realized that you have to go beyond the surface. Because on the surface, you could say, oh, I'm not African because I don't look like, in terms of what I wear. I don't speak the language, all of that. So I had to get to the level of deep culture. We call it deep structure. And that is worldview. And that is something in Yurugu, that book, I call Utamaroho. White anthropologists have used the term ethos. And what that is what Utamaroho is. It's culturally the spirit of the culture. It's what a people share in terms of spirit that makes them special, makes them unique, okay, and helps to explain their behavior. So I had to introduce those concepts and get to that level of culture. So I begin by doing that. But then I do this thing, or we did together, of showing them things in their lives which they do that they don't realize is African. It comes from Africa. I mean, I love to do that. And what I would do is tell them to go home and talk to their grandma or their great aunt or uncle, and ask them certain questions. Ask them, and I would have these little things to say. Okay, now I'm going to give you one. Okay. I love doing this.
You look excited.
You ask them, and I learned this from a little child. I used to be with and teach in New Orleans. And one time we were doing hair together. And finished her hair, I was combing the hair, and took her hair out, and I was throwing it away. And she said, this is a little 5-year-old. And she said, oh, no, Auntie, no, don't throw it away. And I said, what do you mean don't throw it away? She said, no, we don't do that. You don't just put it in the trash.
Because it's hair.
I was like, but something said to me, aha, this is very important, and it's important to our people as a whole and understanding who we are in Africa. And this was even before I started studying the culture. But I kept asking her, well, why? And so she gave me this answer. She said, well, you have to burn it. You have to burn it. She said, because I was saying why. She said, the birds will come and make a nest of it.
Yes.
I see you smiling.
Yes.
And drive you crazy. Now, that sounds like you don't pay attention to that. She's saying that's silly.
And she's 5, so what she know? Okay.
Superstition is the word that we would use for it. That makes no sense. Okay. But I knew that the way that child was relating to what she was saying, that there had to be something deep about it. Later, in my studies of African civilization, I was studying, Yoruba. I was studying traditions in Nigeria. And I was studying the process by which you're trained. You go through training and initiation.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that there are places that you go to where it's isolated. You're isolated, from the community for a period of time. And you're going through intense instruction, right? And there is discipline in that time.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of control that has to be during that time. And there was that when you leave that place, the priest who is training you and who is responsible for you, they have some of your hair. Now, you don't want to do anything that you're not supposed to do while they got your hair.
Your hair, right.
Because they still have a connection to you and can still discipline you and punish you.
So it's all wow. Because we grew up on the same thing. Like, you don't throw your hair away.
But you don't
just
know
put
why.
it in the trash. Not only that somebody could do something with it. I knew that, right? I knew something could happen, right? Somebody could do something with it, but I didn't know the origin of that story.
Exactly. But in studying us and studying ourselves and understanding the African worldview, then I was able to understand that, to figure it out. And you see, the depth of it is in terms of spiritual thought, philosophy, and worldview, is that there is not the same kind of, you see, Europeans have difficulty with connecting mind and body. And they'll almost admit that in terms of their medical procedures and so forth, is that they can't really make that connection. Whereas for us, we understand the connection between spirit and matter. That they are one. Now that's a deep philosophical, I can explain that in those terms, but that didn't have to be understood by that 5-year-old who said to me, oh, no, you don't do, right?
Yeah.
But what has happened is that we have the brilliance of African culture, in spite of all that they have done to us. We have ways that we have passed on things that we don't even understand what we're passing on. Right. But you know what we're passing on? We're passing on African ancestry. We're passing on who we are, which is such a wonderful thing, such a miraculous thing, given the fact of what we came through. Yeah. How many generations that child was, you are separated from when we were invaded and kidnapped and put through the bottom of these ships and so forth. Isn't that incredible? But to understand that, you have to understand the African world. So get back to your question. The course in that process, these students, it wasn't academic. You see? Because academic is something that is quote unquote objective, which is no such thing, but with you're separated from, you have nothing to do with. This was them. They were learning about themselves. In the course, through these kinds of things, I was able to music. The music. which Masiki will tell you in a minute, right? They were able to see and feel their Africanness. So that's how you convince them, but it is a process.
Yeah, you can't deny it once I think that is something that I've noticed even with some of the people that are watching, right? Because the episode on Ori and the episode on ancestors in specific,
yes,
we got a lot of people that were saying, I don't practice Ifa, but this is resonating with me.
Absolutely.
I don't practice Ifa, but this is resonating with me, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's like your spirit recognizes truth.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's inside, again, it's in our DNA, it's in our energy. This is who we are, right? So it's like reuniting with a part of yourself, right? That you didn't even know was there.
That's what it is.
But immediately you recognize
that's what it
that
is.
This is a part of you.
And that's what the circle came out of, and that's what the course was. There was something that you made me think of just by what you said. What did you just say?
Recognizing something that was in you that you didn't even know.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You see, there's one way of understanding, say, ancestor communion that I can explain, which I've done a lot of, and talk deep philosophical stuff. But there's another way of doing, it's like multi-levels where you can understand it just through what we just did of things that you do and that you've always done, or in the language. Okay, so there is a thing about ancestor communion and our concept of life and of the person. That's the thing, is what you are made up of, because you are an ancestor.
I see.
Now that's deep.
That is deep.
But that's African.
Yes.
Okay? And so what that means is that there are stages of life that you go through in development in terms of the African worldview and African culture. And it actually starts in the spirit world. It doesn't start at physical birth. It starts but that's a whole nother thing. Okay? So as you progress through life, you are helped to go through, prepared for the next stage, because that next stage represents a new responsibility and so forth, right? And so that's why we have our rites of passage, which is such a very important part of African life, right? Which was taken away from us when they captured us and made us captured workers, you see? So these are the things that there's a reason for us to recreate.
Yes.
Okay? Because of what it'll mean for our well-being. So you go through these various stages. So you move from, you're a baby, then you're a toddler, then, a small child, but then very importantly, here what they call a teenager, adolescence. We don't do that. But, 13 and so forth, that thing. Then very importantly, prepared for marriage. Very importantly, prepared for childbirth, which is extremely important, right? You will be prepared for the warrior class, which is extremely important. You are prepared to be an elder, because the role of the elder is essential, right? So what happens then with each of those stages as you move from one to the other? The transition from each stage to the next is a death and a rebirth. So that the concept, let me come back to that. So what happens when you're an elder? What's your next stage? Well, in the European thing and the Christian thing and all of that stuff, you die.
It's over.
And that's the end.
Right.
Not so for Africans.
That's it.
For Africans, again, there is the death, but it's the death that prepares you and makes possible rebirth. So you are reborn as an ancestor. Okay? Which means that for us, we are immortal.
That's it.
But you're only immortal in terms of African spiritual systems, the African worldview, African culture, the African understanding of the universe, the African understanding of the person, is because you could reborn into your family. You continue to do that. That
is so, it's so important. You talked about the stages of, the various initiation stages, if you will.
Yes.
And how that has been, I'm thinking right now about how many of us don't prepare. Right. So there's very little, space for us to prepare for these different initiations, but also, how maybe we don't even have the opportunity to achieve some of them sometimes, right? Because of the environment in which we're in.
Yes.
I'm also thinking about just how from the African worldview, each of those initiations are celebrated, right? You have people around you. This is bringing me to when I was pregnant with my daughter.
Yes.
And what I was feeling, and actually called, right? I gotta call Masiki clearly because he's on my brain today. But I called him for advice, and he reminded me, he sent me back home to my mama. He was like, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go home to your mother and be encircled with those same women that you grew up with, right?
Wow.
I have a cousin that's a sister to me in the Virgin Islands and friends and family that I didn't have here. He said, you need that in this moment because that's what we had as African people. You're separated. You don't have the circle, the women's circle around you.
Absolutely.
Right? To help you. You're lost and confused and you're feeling all of this fear. That's because you're not right next to your mama who would have been giving you, right, the encouragement and the love. And that's where I went. I went there for weeks and, got encouragement and love and was able to calm my energy down in preparation to give birth to Soraya. And those are things that again are missing sometimes from our space.
That kind of thing that you just described is actually written into African culture. That's why people need to see it. They need to study it. They need to understand it. It's ingenious.
Yes.
So there would be mechanisms for you to automatically do that as you are preparing to give birth. The women's circle would be there. That would be part of tradition.
Yes.
The tradition is powerful. Yes. And also things we don't look at, women's associations, the market women, what that meant and how that's connected to the childbirth. Jifa has a wonderful story about, her having a baby and then being in the market and how they're helping and so forth. That is part of the culture.
Yes.
That's not something that has to be thought about and let's put this together and do. That is what people grow in or are taught in. You see, one thing I wanted to say, you were talking about how do you teach people that they're African. And I was talking about the worldview and you said, how do you do that and so forth. And I like to give examples in the language. So we talk about the rebirth, which is extremely important concept, okay? Which actually gives us collective immortality because we are reborn in the culture. As the culture continues, we continue, okay?
Yes,
and that would be even for someone who didn't get to go through all the different stages, by the way. As long as we keep the culture intact, we keep them alive.
Yes,
they live in the culture. Now, that's a deep concept. But have you ever heard anybody say about a child, looking at a child and say, she's been here before?
Absolutely.
I know.
Absolutely.
You see?
Yeah.
Things like that, I would point out to the students, what do you think that comes from? What do you think that means? You see, it comes from this concept of the ancestral connection and the idea of rebirth and the continuity of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
The continuity of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
See? So all of our practicing, not just practicing African spiritual systems, but understanding them, studying them, pushing yourself to really envelop and manifest them. What they do is they give us things. Gifts come from them. You see, it's not just an intellectual thing, but it is a real power. It's a spiritual power which we have as African people that is special and makes us special. And by the way, I think we need to use that power, what I call politically, that is for the movement.
So here's what I want to do, Mama Marimba, because we're at our hour, but my next question was specifically about resistance and revolutionary change. So that's where I wanted to go. So what that means is that we have to have another conversation at some point. This show is only an hour, and I knew that you were going to give us, but it's imperative to me that our people hear from you on how it is that our African systems can be and should be used in terms of resistance, especially now.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
Oh yes.
So what I'm going to say is that you and I should make another date.
Okay.
For you to come back, because that was when I originally asked you to come, I originally wanted you to talk about the warrior. I really wanted you to help break down warrior woman energy, and specifically, I was like, oh, nobody else is going to do like this, like Mama Marimba, right? But then this conversation, the opportunity for this conversation came as a result of last week's conversation, and I felt like it was important. But I also feel like there's a part 2 for you. So if you'll have us, and I would love for you to come back, and appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to teach.
Yes.
I love it.
So, Mama, the way that we end the show each week is for the guests to give a blessing to the people that are watching. So you have people, we've learned that we have people watching all over the diaspora now, like literally people are tuning in, people that are in our traditions and that are studying African spiritual systems, and people that are not. People who this is resonating with, right, for the first time. So if you will, this is a woman that has walked in the Pan-African movement, a mother of the movement that has sat with us today. So her giving you a blessing is a big deal. So stop what you're doing. If you walking around, you cleaning the house, whatever you're doing, just stop for a moment. And I'd like you to receive this blessing.
I'd like to say to you that you are African, and therefore you are blessed.
Yes, sir.
You represent, you represent the people who are going to save humanity by first saving yourself. And so my blessing to you is to affirm your Africanness, which gives you the power to do whatever it is that you need to do.
Ashe. Thank you, Mama Marimba. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being a part of this particular movement at this time, right? We have started this with women in our community. We have opened up dialogue that we weren't having at first, right? So we have the dialogue here on the podcast. We also have the app, which you have access to. So if, there's a link to the app at this time that you should be able to download and continue to have conversations with us. There's learning opportunities there. There's opportunities for us to pray, to grow together, to do ritual together, as Mama is saying, because this is very important for us. So please like, comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not. We are appreciative of the fact that we have gotten the subscriptions that we have and that our channel is doing well. We don't take that for granted. So thank you. I want to give a shout out to All Good Things who gave us this shirt to wear. There'll be a link there as well. So we are growing, we are learning, we are experiencing, and we appreciate you all for being with us. Until next time. Adabo.